All right. Oh, pretty fascinating, Bryan Hayes, wasn't it? I don't know if I've ever seen a coach do something like that, stand in front of a beautiful body of water and just open up a little bit. And not only that, take responsibility for not getting the job done, something that you and I talked about the players weren't so keen to do earlier in the week in their media availability. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I have a massive appreciation for that because I don't know if I would have done that. I would have been throwing grenades, Jay, right? Like it's Shanahan's fault and Tree Living's fault to go, fire the players if you can. Why are you firing me? That might have been my approach, but I thought it was incredibly classy. I think it's a smart way to go out. Like Sheldon Keefe handled, I thought, his media duties incredibly well throughout his time here. He is a local guy, like you said. He's from Brampton, Greater Toronto area. He was here for a long time. I think he understands he was given ample opportunity. Shanahan, Tree Living, Dubas prior to this, they showed a lot of loyalty in him. And he made a lot of money, and he's still got a couple of years left on his deal. He's going to make money. He's a young guy, and I think he wants to be around the game for a long time, and I think he likely will be. So I thought incredibly classy. Kind of sets a new bar. I wonder if the other coaches around the league are like, great, now when I get fired, I got to do a video too. Like, what, am I going to climb a mountain next time
Exactly.
to, top this guy?
These guys are going to have to buy green screens, Bryan, and project some sort of image like space or the Milky Way or something. Like they're going to take it to a whole other level. I agree. It's really something. I feel like there's going to be a million parodies of it too. So we just started with that one. It's interesting. I just was reading this. Keefe, highest points percentage of any coach in franchise history, but as I pointed out earlier, just the one playoff victory, series victory in 5 seasons. Bryan, how would you sum up Sheldon Keefe's time in Toronto?
I think the same way I would sum up, the core 4 players, the core 5 if you include Morgan Riley. Excellent, like superb regular season coach and regular season resume. And just couldn't get it done in the playoffs. Like he's really no different than what Matthews is, Marner is, Nylander, Tavares, Riley. He never won a Jack Adams, although I think he probably was in the running and should have been in the running on a couple of different occasions. I think this year during the regular season, he did a phenomenal job. He dealt with a lot of different fires that he had to put out, a lot of different injuries, and, third string goalies having to play long runs throughout the season, and Martin Jones and others. And I thought he did a really good job. But ultimately, when it comes to the Maple Leafs, when you talk about their history, no one's interested in the regular season anymore. No one cares how much you win during the regular season because prior to him showing up, it was a formality that they would make the playoffs. Mike Babcock made the playoffs, right? It wasn't just about getting to the playoffs. When Sheldon Keefe arrived, it was about winning in the playoffs, and they only won 1 round when he was behind the bench. And when they did, they got into the next round and they lost in 5 games. So, they lost a lot at home. They lost clutch games, Game 7s, Game 5 against Columbus in the bubble. So I think ultimately, really, really good regular season coach. The jury's out in terms of whether or not he can ever get it done in the playoffs, but it's not going to be here. And ultimately, that's why he's moved on, because during the regular season, you know what you're getting. And I think whoever the next coach is will come in with the same standard. You better make the playoffs. That's what Keefe was supposed to do every year. But in order to move past what Keefe has been bringing to the table, the next guy's got to win in the playoffs.
All right, now the attention, of course, shifts to who will replace Keefe behind the Leafs bench. Let's take a look at the odds brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. And no surprise, I think Brian Craig Berube is the betting favorite, followed by Gerard Gallant, Dean Evison, Todd McClellan. Names we've been hearing out there. Interesting name there toward the bottom, Joel Quenneville. I know that our mutual friend Jamie McLennan has been pushing that name. Our other mutual friend Steve Simmons wrote a whole article today about the fact that he thinks it's actually Quenneville who would be the guy who should be leading the Leafs going forward as opposed to Berube. If the decision was yours, Bryan, because I know you're going to be GM of the team someday, it might as well happen now, who would you pick as coach of this team?
Honestly, I would pick a guy that's not even on that board, and that's Rod Brind'Amour, because he's still not under contract moving forward in Carolina. And I understand it's moving in that direction, and I'm not sure he's going to leave. But I would find a way to make sure Rod Brind'Amour understood, and his whole staff, that the Maple Leafs will pay double whatever Carolina's willing to pay. Right? I would go back to where it started with Mike Babcock when they made him the richest coach in NHL history. I do the same thing with a guy like Rod Brind'Amour. If he's willing to budge, if he's willing to think about leaving Carolina, and I'm not sure that he is, but if I'm the GM and I have the opportunity to have a blank check because this ownership group in Toronto has more money than anyone else, I am buying tickets behind the bench in Carolina, and I'm planting Larry Tannenbaum there with a dollar sign, on my forehead and saying, Rod, what's it going to take? I'll bring you, I'll bring your staff up, I'll bring the training staff, I'll bring everyone up. But assuming Brind'Amour returns, it does feel like Craig Berube is a guy that makes a lot of sense. I mean, obviously his reputation speaks for itself. He was a Leaf for a brief period of time. He was a part of that famous Doug Gilmour trade, actually. He had just signed with the Leafs. He had barely played with them, and he went the other way in the Gilmour trade. So technically, he is a Maple Leafs alumni, and he's won a championship. I think that's important. I think you need someone that's won before, which would take a guy like McClellan out of it in terms of being a head coach. I like Todd McClellan, but he won a Stanley Cup as an assistant coach in Detroit. You look at a guy like Gerard Gallant, who obviously has done really good things early on in tenures with new teams, like Vegas, got to a Cup final, didn't win, where Berube's done that. So I like the pedigree of Berube. Money's not going to be an issue, right? Like if they want Berube, if Berube is willing to listen, or Berube is looking for the most money, I think that makes a lot of sense for the Maple Leafs.
Okay, no matter who the new coach is, knowing the fact that that core five all have no movement clauses, moving even one of them is going to be very difficult. It is just tweaks to the depth players, adding some new defensemen, and having a new voice behind the bench, and then running it back with the five. Is that enough to win next season, in your opinion?
No, I don't believe it is. I think something has to change with that core five, the four forwards and Morgan Riley. I would, Matthews is coming back. I would obviously keep Matthews. Nylander's coming back. I would keep Nylander. I would be prone to keeping Morgan Riley. I think it's Mitch Marner and Tavares. And Jay, you and I, we've talked about this. And, the players, they hold a lot of control. They both have no movement clauses. Who knows if they're willing to waive, if they're willing to accept it. And I can't speak on whether or not Brad Treliving has any interest in doing that. We could find that out, Friday morning and moving forward to see if they actually have the appetite for it. But I think that's what ultimately has to change, right? Like Babcock was here, Keefe is here. There's been different management. Every other player around those five guys has changed. There has been a lot of turnover from when Matthews and Marner and Nylander arrived, and over the last 6 years since Tavares got here, all types of different wingers and third and fourth line centers and D partners and D pairings and goaltenders. So I do think it's imperative that core five changes. I think a couple of guys likely should move on. I think you need a fresh start. I think you need a new era here. But I will say the goaltending position, Jay, I don't think it's getting enough attention right now. You look at who's up for the Jack Adams this year. Rick Bowness, who's his goalie? Yep. Connor Hellebuck, right? Rick Tocchet, who's his goalie? Thatcher Demko, right? Andrew Brunette, who's his goalie? UC Soros. Those are three of the best goalies in the league. Yep. Show me a good goalie, I'll show you a good coach. So I'm sure whoever the new coach is thinking that right now. What are we doing here? Is Joseph Wall going to be the guy? Can he stay healthy? I don't think he can bring Samsonov back. So if Samsonov's gone, who's that guy? Like, what is going to happen in net? Because it's the most important position in the sport, and you have to rely on it. So it's important to have the coach, I think, change the core five, but they also better get to work and figure out who's going to play in net moving forward, because if you don't have goaltending, I'm not sure it matters that much who's behind the bench.
It's interesting. Keith Pelly, who we will finally hear from on Friday morning, as you know, Brian, is the kind of guy who I could see hopping on a plane, heading to Raleigh, presenting some offer to Brind'Amour that he can't turn down. So maybe Keith is watching, and Keith, if you are, make sure if you do hire Rod Brind'Amour, you give credit to my friend, Bryan Hayes. Thanks, Brian.